The clock struck 7 in the evening, and the city was preparing for a night full of lights, laughter, and elegant dinners. In front of one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, with gleaming windows and perfectly aligned tables, a figure appeared that seemed completely out of place in such a setting. A disheveled man, wearing wrinkled clothes and an air of abandonment, slowly pushed the door open. The diners, dressed in evening attire with wine glasses in hand, looked at him as if he were a ghost interrupting their bubble of luxury. From the very first moment, the clash was palpable. His footsteps echoed in the silence of the room, and some glances were fixed on him with a mixture of surprise and disdain. A murmur spread through the dining hall, subtle at first, but then increasingly audible. Who is that man? What is he doing here? He doesn't look like he belongs. Waiters exchanged worried looks, some approaching with reluctance, others with obvious annoyance. It was unusual for someone like him to set foot in that temple of sophistication. The man walked forward with a firm but calm step. He ignored the stares, as if he was used to being invisible or, worse yet, to being seen as a problem. He stopped in front of a group of well-dressed gentlemen who were whispering, looked up, and with a slight smile asked loudly, "Could someone tell me where I can sit? I would like to have dinner here." Everyone froze. His words were clear and firm, but they seemed not to fit the unkempt figure before them. A waiter approached, adjusting his spotless apron and adopting a severe expression. "Sir, this is a private restaurant. We only serve reserved clients here. I'm sorry, but you cannot stay here." The man nodded slowly, unruffled. "I understand," he said. But before stepping back, he took a card out of his pocket that seemed out of place with his appearance. It was fine, gold, with letters that shone under the lights. The murmuring grew louder, conversations stopped, and the air was charged with tension. Nobody expected what was about to happen. The scene, which seemed like a simple, awkward encounter, had a twist that nobody saw coming. The question hung in the air: who was this man, really? Why had he entered like that, with that appearance, into a place where everyone judged him mercilessly? And above all, what did that card have that could change everything? But before revealing more, let's return for a moment to those who were watching. At the table by the window, a pair of business people whispered to each other, discreetly discussing how inappropriate the incident was. "He's surely a beggar looking for trouble," said the woman, adjusting her gloves disapprovingly. Her companion nodded, glancing sideways at the scene. Deep down, more than annoyance, there was fear. Because that man, with that simple question, had broken an unwritten code: exclusivity. The restaurant manager finally appeared, a man of few words and a sharp gaze. He approached the beggar and looked him up and down, as if evaluating every detail, searching for some reason to turn him away. Then the beggar slowly raised his hand and showed the card. It was a special invitation signed by the owner himself, addressed to Mr. Alejandro Rios, general manager. The silence was absolute in the seconds that followed. No one could believe their own eyes. The man who had entered looking like a bundle of rags not only knew the codes of that place, he was the owner of the gastronomic empire that everyone admired, and had attacked with blind prejudice. The looks of contempt gave way to a mixture of shame and admiration. The waiters who minutes before had tried to force him out now bowed to him respectfully. A radical change that no one expected, and which broke more than etiquette norms. It tore down walls of prejudice and stereotypes that, until that moment, seemed unbreakable. But what made him enter like that, almost invisible, into his own restaurant? Was it just a test for his customers? Or was there a deeper reason to put himself in the shoes of someone the world despises? The answers were yet to come, and the story was only beginning to unfold. Just imagine for a moment the impact of such a gesture, to arrive and be judged regardless of who you really are, just because of how you look. Alejandro didn't just want to eat. He wanted to show everyone something crucial: how much harm prejudice can do in seconds, how an appearance can distort reality. The atmosphere in the restaurant changed forever that night. Some diners who had previously laughed at the situation now looked down, understanding a message without need for words. Others, on the other hand, seemed to search for excuses to justify their behavior, as if admitting the mistake was too painful for their egos. Alejandro finally sat at the table he himself had reserved, but this time with a presence that eclipsed his appearance. He ordered a special dish, something simple but exquisite, and was served with genuine if belated courtesy. He said not another word, letting his actions speak for him. As this story unfolds, the question lingers in the air. What does this episode teach us? How can we learn to look beyond appearances, beyond labels, to find the truth within each person? Alejandro, with his card in hand and his invisible suit, sent a powerful message: do not judge before you truly know. For real identity always emerges in the end, with strength and clarity. But the night was not over yet. What seemed like a simple act of social justice, a lesson about prejudice, holds hidden secrets, twists that no one expected, and answers that will come in due time. Alejandro has more to tell, and his experience promises to reveal much about human nature, the power of empathy, and above all, the need to break the stereotypes that bind us. Stay tuned, because the story is just beginning, and what comes next will forever change how you see a beggar, a stranger, and perhaps yourself. The sound of the door opening was barely a murmur, but it was enough for all eyes inside the restaurant to focus on the figure that had just entered. A man with wrinkled, dirty clothes and in an obvious state of neglect walked in slowly, oblivious to the hostility that quickly flared up around him. His unkempt beard, the stains on his jacket, and the smell that seemed to follow him instantly awakened whispers of rejection. The diners paused their conversations and set down their knives to stare openly. The scene followed an unwritten script, a beggar in the temple of opulence. The man did not seem intimidated, nor even aware of all those glances filled with judgment and disdain. He calmly chose the words he spoke. "May I sit and order something?" he asked, almost in a whisper, but with a steady voice that broke the murmur. The waitress, a young woman with a sharp smile, twisted her expression somewhere between surprise and disgust. In her eyes, this man had no place there. "Sir, this is a restaurant for customers," she said, armed with a confidence that had little to do with kindness. "We don't have space for people like you." Barely disguised laughter from nearby tables quickly filled the air. "People like me?" he repeated, with impeccable calm, as if meditating on his words. That silent challenge made some stand up from their chairs, knives and glasses in hand, ready to throw him out. A burly man, projecting more confidence than kindness, approached with a frown. "Look, old man, we don't serve beggars here." But what no one expected was the response that followed. The man looked straight into his aggressor's eyes, with a mixture of sadness and a fiery spark of wounded pride. "I am not a beggar," he said slowly, leaving the room in suspense, as if each word weighed tons. The faces around him tightened, puzzled. Then who was he? What did he want? The waiters were already whispering among themselves, some pulling out their phones to record the scene, eager to share what, for them, seemed a daily spectacle of indignity. However, the stranger seemed to have become a magnet. The tension became palpable, and the restaurant manager appeared like a flash, trying to bring the situation under control. "Sir, you must leave, or I will call security," he warned firmly. In that instant, the man became obstinate, and for the first time, a slight smile appeared on his weathered face. "Of course I'll stay," he replied. "But first, let me show you something." He pulled from a worn pocket an elegant-looking card with a restrained, professional design, holding it up to the light so everyone could see it. There was his name, bright and distinguished: Alejandro Cortez, founder and CEO of Cortez Enterprises. Immediately, a brutal silence gripped the room. The echoes of laughter vanished as if by magic, as faces turned pale and stunned. That card represented not only wealth, but hard-earned power and respect. What to them had been just a vagrant was now a man who could buy and close that place in an instant. More than that, it was a cruel reminder of how wrong they had been, blinded by simplistic prejudices and appearances. But Alejandro was not there for revenge, nor to humiliate. His gaze moved over each person who had scorned him, making it clear with that uncomfortable silence how useless their superficial judgments were. "Never judge someone by their clothes or their appearance," he said firmly, with a weight of experience that only time and suffering can give. "The stories you tell with your mouths are false. Mine, though it may seem so, is not a beggar's story." As his words floated in the air, thick with surprise and shame, the manager, trying to recover a little authority, asked in a thin voice, "Then why did you come like this?" But so, between shadow and light, the question lingered in the air and in everyone's heart. How many times have we judged without knowing, discarded without understanding? What stories do those who seem less than us hide? And above all, what would happen if each of us could reveal some hidden truth that no one suspects? With that uncomfortable reflection, the man picked up his cane, bowed slightly, and left the restaurant amid the solemn silence of all, leaving behind a lesson none of them would ever forget. Just as the clock struck 8 in the evening, the main door of Le Chateau Doré opened with an unexpected creak. All the diners, elegantly dressed, looked up. A man entered with unsteady steps, as if dragging the weight of years and disappointments. His clothes, patched and stained, seemed to tell a story quite different from the refined atmosphere surrounding him. The contrast did not go unnoticed. A whisper ran like wildfire among the tables. "Who is that guy?" The light, dim and warm, barely illuminated his face, covered with a scruffy beard and tangled hair. But the expression in his eyes was impossible to ignore. There was something intense, almost defiant, behind that disheveled appearance. The man moved forward with a determined step, oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to the stares that cut through him like sharp knives. The waiters, in impeccable platinum uniforms and black ties, exchanged looks of bewilderment and disapproval. One approached with a forced smile, trying to hide his annoyance. "I'm sorry, sir, this is not a place to be with that appearance. Could you please leave?" The man just lifted his chin and said in a calm but firm voice, "I'm here to dine." The murmuring grew louder. "Who does he think he is?" The clients wondered, while some began to point at him, whispering prejudiced comments. "He must be drunk. He probably wants to order something and not pay." What a lack of respect! But he remained unfazed. His gaze swept the room with the serenity of someone who has never asked for permission to be where he is. The tension was palpable, and for a moment, an awkward silence fell over the entire place. The manager appeared, a tall, immaculate figure dressed in a dark suit, seemingly determined to end this unpleasant scene. "Sir, I'm asking you to leave. Our establishment maintains a standard, and your presence is causing discomfort among our clients." But the disheveled man didn't move. Instead, with a calm gesture, he drew a card from the inner pocket of his tattered coat. He slid it across the counter, in front of the astonished eyes of the manager and all present. The card gleamed, adorned with an elegant golden logo and embossed letters that, for an instant, made the air freeze. Alexandre Laurent, CEO, Laurent Capital Group. A sepulchral silence followed this revelation. The mocking looks turned into disbelief, some even into shame. How could this beggar be the same man who led one of the country's most powerful financial firms? "This can't be real," someone murmured. The man, now absolute master of the scene, approached with a slight smile. "There was a time when I was judged by my appearance. Today I'm here to remind you that appearances deceive." With a natural gesture, he sat at the most elegant table and ordered dinner with the same confidence with which he had walked through the door minutes before. But the story did not end there, because while they served his meal, behind that appearance and power lay a deeper secret that none of those present could imagine. And just when everyone thought they understood the game, Alexandre began to explain why he chose to enter that night as that man, and what he hoped to change with that simple act. The night filled with whispers and unasked for lessons, and all who had scorned him would have to face something greater than shame, a truth that challenges the superficial and calls into question the prejudices we all carry without realizing. What drove a man to hide his true face to the limit? And what will happen when Alexandre Laurent's double life comes to light? What seemed a simple story of contempt and revelation was just the beginning of a chain of events that no one, not even Alexandre, could anticipate. The question now was, were the chef and the restaurant staff ready for what was coming? And there, at that instant, while everyone looked at each other, not knowing what to say, the disheveled man who had produced the golden card was much more than a disguised CEO. He was a powerful message, an uncomfortable mirror, and an urgent call to look beyond the surface. A lesson that would change everything forever. But the story still had more. Much more. The sun was already starting to set behind the tall buildings when he appeared at the entrance of the city's most exclusive restaurant. Dressed in torn, dirty clothes and with a street odor no one could ignore, he walked slowly but confidently toward the large glass doors. An unexpected presence in a place where brightness and elegance reigned, almost like a monster out of place. The people around him murmured, and their eyes pierced the man as if he were a disease. What was that beggar doing there in a haven for the rich and powerful? Tension immediately grew, thick and palpable in the air. Customers enjoying their dinners stopped talking, set down their cutlery, hid their jewelry, and adjusted their suits. On the other side, the waiters looked at him with a mix of disbelief and contempt. A gentleman in a white shirt, who seemed to be the manager, approached with a firm stride and a stern face, ready to throw him out without question. But the man didn't flinch. He didn't show even a hint of fear. On the contrary, he raised his head and in a firm voice asked for a table. "Just one table, please," he said. It was clear to everyone present that his request was not just to eat. An uncomfortable silence ensued, as if the restaurant itself was holding its breath. The murmurs began to intensify. Some customers whispered under their breath, while others simply threw him hostile glances. Who does he think he is? Can't he see this isn't a place for people like him? They should kick him out. He's ruining the atmosphere. The staff hesitated, hands on hips and brows furrowed. A waiter approached authoritatively. "Sir, we do not accept that kind of clientele here. Please, kindly leave." But the beggar didn't step back, not even once. At that moment, everyone thought they knew how the story would end. A common scene, a homeless man thrown out and forgotten in seconds. But then, something happened that no one there could have predicted, something that changed the atmosphere and turned the story around completely. That man, who looked like he had nothing, who didn't seem to belong there, took a shiny, elegant card out of his pocket, with a name that left everyone speechless. There was a silence so deep that even the clinking of glasses seemed to stop. "No one is going to laugh at me in my own house," he said with a confident smile, holding up the card for all to see. It was the owner's card. Yes, the owner, and not just any owner, but the man who had built that gastronomic empire from scratch, who had come from nothing and had once lived on the very same street where they now looked at him with disdain. His eyes burned with justice, and the expressions in the room changed radically. From mockery to surprise, from surprise to shame. Then he began to tell his story, not as a beggar, but as a man who had suffered, fought, and now had the power to show how absurd appearances and prejudices are. He recounted how he had been rejected many times, how doors had been slammed in his face again and again. "They treated me worse than a dog just because of how I dressed, for not fitting the image you thought a successful person should have," he said with no resentment, but with firmness. Each word opened a wound, a deep reflection in every heart present. As he spoke, some customers lowered their gaze, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The waiters, who just minutes before had wanted to throw him out, now wanted to cover their faces. How many times had they judged without knowing? How many opportunities had they denied because of a simple prejudice? He, the man who seemed to be the opposite of all that, was there to teach them a lesson they would never forget. A lesson in humanity, respect, and true value. But the story didn't end there. The owner, with the card still in his hand, decided to invite that group, all those clients who had just despised him, to sit down with him and hear more. More about his life, his battles, and how success isn't measured by appearance but by persistence. And as his words filled the spacious dining room, a deep change began to be felt in everyone present. What had begun as an act of exclusion turned into an opportunity to understand and grow. No one could have imagined that that night, a simple gesture and a card would change the way everyone saw the world outside their luxury bubbles. Because in the end, it doesn't matter what we wear or where we eat or the shine of our clothes. What really counts is who we are and how we treat others when no one is watching. And for a moment, that beggar became a teacher to everyone in that restaurant. Alejandro smiled, a smile that blended melancholy and satisfaction at the lesson he was about to impart. To show you that dignity doesn't lie in clothing, nor in the place where you eat. It's in the spirit you carry within. And that's a truth many of you seem to have forgotten tonight. Eyes lowered, and the silence grew heavier than any word. That night, in that small and elegant restaurant, not only did the atmosphere change, but an invisible mirror, long ago broken by arrogance, began to reflect the truth about the value of people beyond their appearance. But what seemed to be the end of the conflict was only the beginning. Because Alejandro, with a calm that defied expectations, was ready to tell them the full story of how he came to be sitting there, dressed in a way that had made them overlook who he really was. And with each detail, the arrogance that filled the room would, little by little, begin to crumble, leaving everyone wondering not only about him, but about themselves. And what would you have done in their shoes? I assure you this story is far from over. I had never seen anything like it. A man, disheveled, in tattered clothes and with an unkempt beard, pushed open the heavy glass door of the city's most exclusive restaurant. Instantly, the murmur of conversation shifted. Eyes fixed on him, confused and, in many cases, brimming with disdain. The clinking of cutlery ceased, and the air, pristine and dense, turned uncomfortable, almost hostile. What was a beggar doing here, in the midst of tables adorned with crystal candelabras and fine china? The hostesses exchanged hurried glances, visibly uneasy. Some diners discreetly moved away, wondering if it was a joke or perhaps some new form of grotesque entertainment. The man advanced with a steady stride as though the place belonged to him, even though his appearance screamed otherwise. His voice, deep and calm, broke the silence as he requested to be attended to urgently. It was at that moment that everything began to change. A young waiter approached with the forced smile of someone who wants to avoid trouble. "Sir, this is an establishment for customers. We do not accept visitors without a reservation," he said, his eyes lowering to judge each detail of the man's muddied attire. The beggar replied with the same firmness, "I have a reservation, and an outstanding account you ought to know about." Confusion multiplied among those present. An outstanding account? In a place like this, with a man who looked as though he had come straight off the street. However, before he could explain further, the restaurant manager, a severe, elegant woman, approached. Her smile was cold, almost slicing. "Friend, this isn't the place for you. It would be best if you left before we call security." But the man didn't flinch. From the inside pocket of his torn jacket, he produced a card. It was not any ordinary card, nor an ordinary credit card. It was a dark blue card with golden letters, the emblem reserved for the most exclusive customers that restaurant could ever host. A name engraved that left everyone breathless: Don Alejandro Montserrat. Those who had just ignored him now chewed on their words. How was it possible? That man, who looked like a beggar, was actually the owner of the nation's largest financial empire. The story was only beginning, and nobody could take their eyes off the man who, with a single card, had dismantled prejudice and sparked a lesson no one would forget. The mystery didn't just spark curiosity, it raised a wall of questions. What had made him show up in such a way? What message did he wish to convey? And above all, how would those who had despised him react? The story of Don Alejandro Montserrat, the man who decided to play with appearances to prove a point, was about to reveal secrets that would change the very concepts of dignity. respect and justice in that luxurious establishment. But first, we needed to know more about this man and the place where he chose to make such a risky appearance. Only then would we understand the true magnitude of what was about to unfold. That night, under the dim lights of crystal chandeliers and the hushed murmur of cutlery and glasses, several lives were about to be confronted by the harsh reality that a simple gesture was about to unleash. The beggar was not a beggar, and the restaurant, though luxurious, would become the setting for a master lesson none of its patrons expected to receive. Were they ready to discover it? Because sometimes appearance is only the first page of a story that deserves to be told in its full truth. The restaurant door opened with a creak, and all eyes turned to him as if an invisible guest had suddenly barged into an exclusive gala. That hunched figure in tattered and dirty clothes seemed out of place among the gleaming tables and impeccable diners. Knives stopped clinking against plates, and an uncomfortable silence settled in, heavy and expectant. No one could believe that someone like him had dared cross that threshold of marble and glass. The murmurs began like a river that swells, fast and rising. "Does that guy think he's going to stay here?" whispered a woman in a sharp but venomous voice. "He's a beggar," muttered another customer, crossing his arms with disdain. "Doesn't he have anywhere to go?" commented a man in a designer suit, casting a look of contempt as he took a sip of wine. But the most surprising thing was that not even the restaurant staff seemed willing to welcome him. Rather, they seemed intent on making him leave at once. A waiter, elegant and stiff, approached with a determined step, holding a notepad and looking at the man with the exact mix of annoyance and condescension. "Excuse me, sir," he said sharply. "This is not a place for just anyone. A reservation and proper attire are required here. I'll have to ask you to leave." The words fell like bullets, and the beggar didn't respond immediately. It was as if time had frozen in that instant, while everyone waited to see if he would yield or provoke some chaos. But no, he simply leaned on an old cane, raised his gaze, and in a calm voice replied something no one quite heard. The tension grew even more when another waiter approached to back up his colleague, this time with more firmness and not the slightest trace of kindness. "Sir, you need to leave before we call security." The man, tired and perhaps used to such moments, didn't answer with aggression. He simply remained still, letting the silence take over the place as the clientele watched on with a mix of mockery and expectation. What was that shabby man up to? No one could imagine that behind those worn clothes and that face marked by time, there was a story that would throw them all completely off guard. Meanwhile, the murmurs turned into stifled laughter and hostile glances. A group of young people at a nearby table whispered between giggles, pointing at the old man. "Do you think he'll ask us for the check?" joked one, as the others stifled their laughter. A woman in high heels and red lipstick couldn't help but exclaim loudly, "What's that guy doing here? Get him out already!" But despite the harassment, the man didn't move, didn't even blink at the disrespect. His calm was almost unsettling. Then, just when it seemed the tension would snap with the arrival of security, something changed. The man made an unexpected move. He pulled from inside his old jacket a card, a shiny and striking card that, by contrast, seemed out of place in his wrinkled hands. The entire room held its breath. No one dared move or speak or breathe normally. All eyes were fixed on that small piece of plastic as if it had the power to transform reality in a second. It was then that the beggar spoke clearly, dropping words that echoed through the hall and in everyone's conscience. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is my card. I'm the owner of this restaurant." The murmurs turned to uproar. Open mouths and incredulous looks reflected a mix of surprise, shame, and confusion. The customers, who minutes earlier had looked down on him with scorn and pride, now looked away, unable to meet his gaze. But the story didn't end there. The man stood up straight, with a posture that belied his old clothes, and began to tell something no one expected. He told how, after years of success and fortune, a series of bad decisions and personal tragedies had made him lose everything. He had been forced to live on the street, disguising his identity to remind himself who he truly was. This day he decided to return, not for revenge, but to show that appearances can be deceiving, and that respect should go deeper than the superficial. The restaurant staff changed their attitude instantly, from arrogance to shame, while some customers muttered awkward apologies. Some of the laughing young people, their cheeks flushed, could not even look at him, trapped in the contradiction of having judged someone who turned out to be so much more than they imagined. The owner, now recognized, thanked them for the opportunity to make them reflect and asked them to remember always that there is no greater poverty than prejudice. What seemed like an act of provocation became a mirror that showed the worst and best in each of them. And without saying it, it left each person with an unanswered question, and me, what would I do if someone like him entered my life? Because the card had been only a beginning. What really remained to be discovered was the hidden worth that we all carry inside, no matter our appearance or our past. This is where this first part ends. But the story of that man and his card still has much more to tell. Can you imagine what secrets are hidden behind that facade? What trials did he face? And how did he transform not only his own life, but also that of all who judged him so quickly? Stay with me, because what's coming is even more surprising. The man appeared at the restaurant door just as the clock struck 8. His face was covered by years of dust. His wrinkled, torn clothes seemed to tell a story no one wished to hear. He walked slowly, with that mixture of weariness and determination we often see in those who seem to carry the world on their shoulders. The place glowed with dim lights and soft music, an atmosphere inviting tranquility, exclusivity, far from the harsh reality this man represented. And yet there he was, crossing that threshold that for many was sacred, prohibited. As soon as he entered, all eyes turned towards him like an uncomfortable glare. Some customers muttered short remarks. Others pulled their napkins to cover their faces, as if mere eye contact could be contaminating. The waiters froze on the spot, their mechanical smiles becoming stiff and tense. Just seeing him walk with that strange blend of humility and a sort of muffled bark of defiance, heads began to shake in disapproval. A well-dressed man by the bar let out a stifled chuckle, almost imperceptible, but enough to shift the attention towards the newcomer. The manager appeared from the kitchen, a woman in a spotless uniform, her gaze stern. She approached quickly, cuttingly. "Excuse me, sir, but this is not a place for you." The words cracked like a whip. "We have our rules here. You don't understand. I just want to sit down and order something," he replied in a low voice, almost powerless, yet with a gleam that left no room for doubt. There was no fear, but a hard conviction. The manager frowned and called a waiter. "Please, kindly show him to the door." But then, something in the man's eyes made the waiter hesitate for just an instant before approaching. It wasn't only the dirt on his face, there was a hidden fire asking for something more than mere crumbs of compassion or condemnation. "There's no need to be rude," the man said, his voice firmer now. "I just want you to hear me." That was enough for some customers to start whispering, some to frown, and others, inexplicably, to look at him with curiosity rather than scorn. As the waiter prepared to follow the order, the very atmosphere began to change. Something invisible, a mounting tension, began to take hold of the room. The man, without waiting for permission, walked over to the counter by the bar. The story's imaginary camera had to capture that moment. Uncertainty, disguised hatred, and silent expectation. "What will you do now?" whispered an unseen spectator in the audience's minds. "Will he leave? Will they make him pay for his audacity?" But the story was far from over. At that instant, the man took something out of his pocket, a card. It was no ordinary card. It was heavy, discreet, forged with a design that could not be mistaken for ordinary plastic. He raised it slowly, with a gesture that seemed the culmination of many inner battles. "This card," he said clearly, "proves who I really am. Could you please show it to your manager?" The waiter frowned. The tense smile vanished. Some customers got up, wanting a closer look. The woman manager approached, took the card with trembling fingers, and slowly turned it over. On it was a name, a company, and a title that belied his shabby appearance. Silence dropped like a slab over the dining room. No one knew what to say. The world they had built with their prejudices began to collapse. How could this beggar be someone of such power? Had he been there, invisible in plain sight, mocking them? The imaginary camera captured the discomfort of those just minutes before were about to throw him out. That man, with the calm of someone who needs neither proof nor forgiveness, then asked for a menu. "I would like to try your best dish," he said. And while they waited, the fingers that had pointed and judged before now intertwined nervously, questioning everything they had believed. The mysterious beggar had dealt the first blow, but the battle had only just begun. With every passing second, more questions arose than answers. What had led him to that disguised poverty? Why had he decided to enter there on that very night? And above all, what would he do now with the power hidden under his dirt? This was not just any man. He was living proof to never judge a book by its cover, a lesson few were ready to learn. But the man wasn't seeking a superficial apology. There was much more at stake. And as the background music played on, the restaurant's atmosphere began to change, inevitably and slowly. The customers who had laughed before began to look at one another, their pride trying to hide the shame. The manager, for her part, couldn't take her eyes off the card nor the man, who now seemed calm, absolute master of the scene. Everything pointed to something big about to happen, something that would collapse more than just superficial prejudices. But, oh, this would not have a simple ending. For what seemed a beggar kept secrets beyond mere identity, secrets capable of disarming not just a city, but the very minds of those who dared ridicule him. And the story was just beginning to build momentum. What no one present knew was that this card was not only a symbol of financial power, but the key to understanding a hidden reality, a past full of betrayal, lost riches, and half-truths. And that man, covered in dust and scorn, was there to settle scores, to reveal uncomfortable truths no one wanted to face. So no one dared look away, because a question hung powerful in the air. What will happen after the beggar reveals who he really is? No one could imagine. Without a doubt, that night would forever change the perception of all those present. And perhaps, just perhaps, it could change ours too, now that we know only the beginning of this story. Because sometimes life laughs at us with its sudden twists, reminding us that dignity has no label and that respect is earned or lost in an instant. So who is this man, really? What brought him here? And more importantly, are they ready to hear the truth that comes with his card? Don't move, this is just getting started. The sun was beginning to set behind the tall buildings as a disheveled-looking man stopped in front of the impressive glass doors of Le Chateau Doré, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. His clothes were old, stained and wrinkled, his shoes worn and covered in dust. At first glance, no one would have imagined him there, in that temple of luxury and opulence. Yet with a mix of nervousness and determination, he pushed open the door. Instantly, an uncomfortable silence fell over the place. Conversations hushed, and every gaze turned toward him. His footsteps echoed on the elegant marble floor, but what was heard most were the whispers and looks of confusion and disdain. The waiters crossed their arms, looked away, or spoke quietly among themselves. The guests pointed at him, whispered, and some even let out mocking chuckles. A man in an impeccable suit, probably one of the hosts or the manager, quickly stepped out from behind the bar and walked toward him with a firm stride. "Sir, this is an establishment for customers with reservations and proper protocol. We cannot allow you to enter in this state," he said, his voice barely hiding a clearly contemptuous tone. The disheveled man said nothing. He merely lifted his chin and replied calmly, "I just want to have dinner, nothing more." The tension grew. The staff exchanged confused glances and, in their eyes, something else, a small glimmer of doubt. The scene seemed destined for a bigger confrontation. But just as the manager reached out his hand to show the intruder the door, A woman sitting at a nearby table stood up with curiosity. "Who are you to come here like this?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of challenge and skepticism. Without a word, the man approached the table where the woman was sitting. Slowly, he pulled a card with a sophisticated design from his pocket and placed it gently on the table. Everyone in the room was stunned when they saw it. It was no ordinary card, but an ID displaying his full name and a logo that resembled the emblem of a large company or institution. The woman, her eyes wide and jaw slightly dropped, picked up the card and examined it carefully. "Are you?" was all she managed to say as the murmurs rose again, this time a mixture of astonishment and regret. The man everyone thought was a beggar was actually the CEO of one of the country's most powerful firms, recounted one of the waiters. Still in shock over what had happened, suddenly the scene transformed. The man who had been the subject of mockery and disdain became in seconds the object of timid excuses, embarrassed looks, and even apologies. But the disheveled man was not seeking revenge. His expression, though tired, was serene. "Remember," he said, tilting the card ever so slightly toward those who had looked down on him, "appearances are deceiving, especially when someone's fortune and story can change in seconds." As he left the restaurant with a determined stride, not speaking to anyone, the crowd remained frozen, pondering what they had just witnessed. And one question hung in the air. How often do we judge without knowing, missing the chance to see what truly matters? Outside, the man tucked the card back into his pocket, straightened his jacket one last time, and disappeared among the people, leaving behind a lesson that neither the guests nor the staff of Le Château Doré would ever forget. But what had led him to resort to such a disguise? And what story lay hidden behind that face and those worn clothes? What seemed like a simple visit to an elegant restaurant was merely the beginning of something much deeper and unexpected. The door of the elegant restaurant swung open, and there he was, a disheveled man dressed in old, dirty clothes, with an unkempt beard and a tired expression that seemed to carry years of untold stories. No one expected to see someone like him walking into this place, especially not that night. The whispers began immediately, a wave of looks that mixed disgust, surprise, and above all contempt, swept through the room at an almost electric speed. The diners who, just minutes before, had been chatting cheerfully, now fell into an uncomfortable silence. Some forced a hypocritical smile so as not to appear rude, while others turned their eyes away in obvious disdain. The tables with flawless white tablecloths and gleaming glassware drastically contrasted with the scruffy figure making his way through the room, slow but with a steady purpose. He sat at the entrance like an intruder, like an unwelcome guest. The maitre d', an elegant man, fresh from an upper class that was reflected in his every gesture, quickly approached, and barely hiding his irritation said, "Sir, this is an establishment where a certain level is expected. I believe you are in the wrong place." His words sliced through the air with a thin layer of arrogance. The disheveled man looked up, his eyes deep and calm, a hint of irony flickering in them, and replied in a steady voice, "I just want something to eat. Nothing more." The employees began to exchange nervous glances. Some waiters set additional tablecloths with forced gestures, while others simply motioned for the stranger to leave. A woman at a nearby table, dressed in a fine silk gown, exclaimed loudly, "How dare you come here dressed like that? You don't belong here." A masculine voice from the back added, "They should throw him out before he ruins our evening." Despite the hostility, the man remained steadfast, aware that something more was about to happen. As the tension rose, a waiter approached with the menu, as if the man would accept a fair deal, but was met with immediate refusal. "I don't need a menu. Tell me what there is, for those who don't have much." It was a simple phrase, but filled with a dignity that cut through the air like a razor. The maître d' frowned and raised an eyebrow, bewildered by the impassive and almost defiant attitude of the visitor. "Sir, we don't serve just anyone here," he insisted, but the man had already taken a seat in a corner of the dining room without waiting for permission. The diner's whispers turned into louder voices. Some even stood to speak with the manager. Others began using their phones to record or make calls. It was obvious the beggar's presence was disrupting the carefully cultivated atmosphere of the restaurant. Yet while everyone was too busy judging, few noticed the restrained gleam in the man's eyes, a light that promised to change everything that seemed set in stone. Just as the situation seemed on the verge of getting out of control, a young waitress, different from the rest due to her compassionate look, approached discreetly and whispered, "Sir, if you allow me, I can get you something to eat. You shouldn't go hungry." The man nodded, grateful for that small act of humanity. But the moment she returned with a simple plate of food, all eyes in the room were on him, as if waiting for the humiliation to end there, leaving him reduced to his appearance. However, the man accepted the plate respectfully, and before taking a bite, did something no one saw coming. He pulled from one of his pockets a card, not just any card, but something that seemed to shatter at once the barriers of judgment. All the whispers fell silent, replaced by a heavy, almost reverential quiet. The card shone under the restaurant lights. It was elegant, minimalist, but above all, ostentatious in its meaning. A confused murmur rippled through the tables. "What's that? Where did he get that? Who does he think he is?" The man calmly held up the card and in a firm voice declared, "This is my personal card. It represents years of work, of sacrifices you could not begin to imagine. I did not come to beg or to humiliate anyone. I came to make clear that one should not judge by appearances." And with that simple act, the atmosphere changed radically. The maitre d' stood frozen, staring at him speechless. The customers, shocked, began exchanging ashamed glances. Those who had, just seconds before, shouted with contempt now fell silent, as if they understood that they were the true outcasts in this story. As the revelation settled in, the woman who had offered her help looked at the man with new eyes, and the young waitress, who before had feared conflict, now felt proud to have seen beyond his appearance. The man at last took his seat with dignity and ordered what any customer in a luxury restaurant might wish for. But this time, it was not just a meal he was ordering. It was a clear message. Behind any appearance, the most powerful stories can be hidden. The question that lingered in the air was unavoidable. How many times have we failed to see people for who they truly are? How many protocols and prejudices make us miss what is truly valuable? Because the card that man held in his hand was not just a badge of wealth or success. It was a symbol that human dignity should never have social conditions or labels. And although the night went on for everyone that day, nobody forgot that moment when the restaurant Beggar forever changed the way they saw others, leaving an open question that each one would have to answer for themselves. But that was not the last surprise. Even when some thought they knew the ending, the man put his card away and stood up. Before leaving, with a barely perceptible smile, he addressed everyone and said, "Remember, appearances are deceiving, and respect is the true class we should all practice." And with those words, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a silent, shaken, and different restaurant, where the echoes of his presence lingered long after the doors closed for the night. Who was that man, really? What story did that card conceal? The mystery remained, and only those willing to look beyond would find the answer. The beggar moved with hesitant steps toward the entrance of the city's most elegant restaurant. His dirty, worn-out clothes seemed to absorb all the contemptuous glances fixed on him. The shining golden frames and crystal lamps clashed ironically with his disheveled appearance. No one could imagine what a man like him was doing in a place like that. As soon as he crossed the threshold, an uncomfortable silence spread among the diners, as if the very air could no longer sustain his presence. That was when the snickers and whispers began. "What's this guy doing here? Doesn't he see where he's walking in?" was heard in murmurs. The maitre d' approached him with a cold smile, the kind that is not welcoming, and told him with a firm yet curt voice, "Sir, this is not a place for you." "Please, I must ask you to leave." The beggar didn't respond immediately. He stood still, as if weighing every word he was about to say. He knew his appearance was the first battle he had to face. The clients began to stare at him more intently, some pointing at him with disdain, others pulling out their phones, ready to record and share the degrading scene. But he did not show the slightest sign of nervousness. There was something else in his gaze, something that promised a secret about to be revealed, a truth difficult to ignore. "Sir, we don't have any tables for you, and if you insist, I will have to call security," the maitre d' warned, almost losing patience. At that moment, some waiters began to approach, their movements calculated, looking for the quickest way to remove him without causing a scene. But the man calmly raised his hand and unhurriedly let a worn leather wallet fall onto the cash register. The whole room held its breath. A card began to slide out, almost floating for everyone to see. It wasn't just any card. It bore a golden seal and a design that commanded respect. The faces that had been mocking moments before now showed confusion, surprise, and even fear.
"What's that?"
whispered a perfectly made-up woman looking at her husband. The man, who looked like a vagrant, took a seat with an elegance that didn't seek approval, but imposed it. He raised the card with a calm smile and said, "I'd like your best table. This card opens all doors." A nervous murmur spread. Some employees exchanged uneasy glances. Others hurried to set a table for him in the most exclusive area. But who was this man, really? Where had he come from? And above all, what would happen when they discovered that he was not just any ordinary customer, but someone capable of changing everything? Questions floated in the air. The tension persisted, the curiosity grew. What seemed like a simple beggar with luck was about to unmask a deception. Those who had laughed and humiliated without knowing his story. As the murmurs grew louder, the intrigue became unbearable. What secrets did that card hold? What was the real face behind the dirt and rags? The story was just beginning, and what would come next would forever change the perception of everyone present. The beggar was no longer invisible. He had come to give a lesson no one would forget.